Right, to speak a little bit more about this is Gary Eisenberg, who is an immigration lawyer, and he joins us now. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm sure you would have been listening into the Justice Minister earlier on saying that according to the UN treaty, they would be possibly enabled to extradite the Guptas and associates, or anybody who is within that arrest warrant, before the treaty comes into effect. Just explain this a little bit to us, the convention and how it allows this.
Well, the last part I don't really understand. The treaty, the bilateral agreement on extradition and mutual legal assistance will come into operation on the 10th of July, 30 days after the UAE's ratification of the document, of the instrument. And I believe that South Africa has already issued an arrest warrant or a number of different arrest warrants for different people. And a red notice may well be in circulation, which would locate the whereabouts of the accused. And depending on where they are, and let's say one or more of them are in the UAE, then the extradition agreement will allow South Africa to apply for the extradition or the surrender by the UAE of one or more of the accused to South Africa. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, so this UN Convention, Article 44 of the UN Convention Against Corruption, does it somehow allow does it supersede the extradition treaties between two countries? They're obviously two sovereign states, so they would have to agree. And I'm just wondering, why then would it be necessary to have an extradition treaty endorsed by two countries if you could just simply use Article 44 of the UN Convention Against Corruption?
Well, that's a very good question. It would appear from the looks of things that South Africa was unsuccessful in trying to encourage and convince its colleagues, who are also signatories to the UN Convention Against Corruption, to utilize the mechanisms that multilateral agreement offered all parties to come together to find the accused wherever they might be living in any signatory country, and for the police authorities to work together with full political will behind that and to make those individuals available to South Africa. That apparently didn't work. And therefore, South Africa is depending on the bilateral agreement, on the extradition agreement, to put those mechanisms in place between the two countries so that this can take place in a more regulated fashion. And perhaps it's in that way where the mechanisms are far more fully fleshed out in the extradition agreement. Both countries have extradition legislation, and I suppose they found probably a better working relationship within the framework of this bilateral treaty, and this is why the UAE's ratification was so necessary.
Okay, so we'll zero in on the process and the length of time it's taken in just a moment, but so the requesting country obviously should believe that a crime has been committed. But why is it, according to some views, that extradition cases are relatively rare and often controversial?
Well, they're not particularly rare. They're becoming more sophisticated. They're becoming more plentiful. But with regard to this extradition request, which South Africa would be making to the UAE, this is a first in terms of a new bilateral agreement. First of all, these extradition agreements exist between the UAE and a number of other countries. So the UAE is used to, its justice and police authorities, its prosecutorial authorities are used to working with the extradition mechanism, which is domestic within the UAE and with foreign governments. So this is already tried and tested in the UAE. One wouldn't have to teach them anything new. With regard to South Africa, there seems to be a political will against South Africa's back and a perfect storm. You have an Interpol red notice in circulation, or just about to be in circulation. An arrest warrant has been issued. Never before was it issued. And now you have the ratification. So you have the preconditions which make an extradition request ripe by South Africa to the UAE. And I think it's going to happen pretty shortly by the looks of things.
I want us to just trace back what has just happened here. I mean, it's something that began in 2010 and was only finally ratified in 2018. So the Ministry of Justice and Correctional Services met with the ambassador of United Arab Emirates, Mahaj Saeed, to finally exchange the ratification instruments between the two states. What did that entail, and why has it taken roughly about 8 years to hammer it out?
Well, negotiations, I understand, began in 2010. 2018, the instrument was signed by both countries. In November 2018, South Africa ratified the treaty, and Justice Minister Lamola has come out with all kinds of press statements as to why the UAE had been dragging its feet. First, there was something about an official translation, but you know that the treaty comes with its own translation, so I didn't know what that was about. And then there probably were all of these political factors, because in the end, it's the political will of the requested state to make things happen, even though it has the guise of a judicial component, a judicial process. Once the accused is arrested in the UAE, that person will apply for bail and will be able to use the extradition machinery, judicial machinery, to defend themselves in the UAE. So, you know, that is really the process.
So we began with the Justice Minister saying that this could happen before the treaty comes into effect. And earlier on, we did mention that the MPA says it's investigating or that the extradition could result in a protracted legal battle. Now, I'm wondering why is that? So there is a concept of, obviously, in the international legal system. So that's also built on the assumption of, political independence, the significance thereof. Why would it be difficult? Why would it result in a protracted legal case if there's been an agreement? Isn't there some sort of synergy built around the international legal system around this? The assumption, yes, of sovereign states, but non-interference where there's an agreement.
I don't think the UN Convention, if you're talking about international cooperation, I don't think the UN Convention play much of a role here.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We really do appreciate it, Gary Eisenberg, immigration lawyer. We're going to take a quick break.